which is the approval of the agenda. So I don't know who all the voting members are within the conference call, but we'd have to go through obviously a motion and a second and then get a roll call vote. Do I have a motion?
Sean?
Yep.
Paul Flaherty. I think somehow we got to get the Upton Selectmen and the Mendon Selectmen to open their meeting and the Mendon Finance to open their meeting as well.
Okay.
So I'll call the Upton Board of Selectmen meeting open at 7:07 p.m.
And
I'll call the Mendon Selectmen meeting, Select Board meeting open at 7:06 p.m.
And we'll call the Upton Finance Committee meeting at the 7:06.
Okay, very good.
Mendon Finance Committee is open.
Yeah, same thing for the Mendon FinCom.
Okay. So we have all the meetings open. So now an approval of the agenda, which consists of new business, the discussion of the MERSD fiscal year 21 budget and municipal budgets of fiscal year 21, discussion of timelines for the town meetings and town elections, and any next steps, community comments, and then adjournment. Very simple agenda. So if we could get how about just get the leadership of the different committees to get a roll call vote to accept the agenda. Does that sound good?
That's fine.
Okay, Sean Nicholson, aye.
Stephen Metellian, Upton Board of Selectmen, aye.
Maureen Dornell, Board of Selectmen, aye.
Paul Flaherty, Upton Finance Committee, aye.
Chris Burke, Mendon Select Board, aye.
Lonnie Tinio, Mendon Board of Selectmen, aye.
I think that's it, right? Or do we have Mike?
Yeah, Mike Morale, Mendon FinCom, aye.
Okay, I think I have everything now. Okay, let me get these signed and I'll reply back through this thing, which you'll get a copy of as well. Okay, I'll call you back.
Okay, so we have approval of the agenda. Now we can move on to new business.
Okay, bye.
So Joe, do you want to take up the discussion at this point?
Is it possible for everybody to mute just to make sure we're not getting the feedback?
Oh, I think as the leader of the meeting, you can mute everybody.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, guys, no offense, I'm going to mute everybody. That way there isn't some of that background noise.
Joe, just a quick point. What we experienced in the past is everybody who wants to speak actually has to unmute themselves.
Correct.
Whereas you as a chair, you can't do that. So
Okay.
just for everybody on, just make sure that if you want to talk, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think right now everybody is muted with the exception of me, but like Chris just said, everybody can unmute themselves at will. I just have a few things to share with you, some news to share. And first and foremost, thank you everybody for coming together in relatively short order in kind of thinking through moving forward with the regional school district's budget, particularly in light of just an incredible crisis. You know, I right before this meeting, I was going through my Twitter feed and there was a link to the joblessness numbers across the country. And I guess Governor Baker at his press conference today announced that we could be looking upwards of about a 24% unemployment rate. So this is a super, super challenging crisis that we're going through. And over the last 2 or 3 school committee meetings, myself and our business director of finance, Jay Beyer, and the regional school committee have been kind of looking at the possibilities. And, you know, ironically enough, I know it seems like a lifetime ago, but just on March 9th, the regional school committee certified a budget. I know I had the opportunity to meet with both finance committees and talk about the vision of the school district and how important it was to move forward with the many you know, real core strategic initiatives and strategic objectives of our strategic plan to best meet the needs of all of our learners. However, you know, with this crisis, you know, in discussion with the regional school committee, we're all very, very cognizant of this override. And we knew that it was going to be very, very challenging, even pre-pandemic, to have very, very sizable overrides of 1.4 million in Upton and, you know, between 1 million and 1.1 million in Mendon. So I think we were rethinking all of that, and we want the best for our students, but I think we also, nobody in the leadership of our district and with the regional school committee are, you know, we taking anything for granted. So we've started to look at how can we conceivably retool what was already certified back on March 9th for something that's realistic. However, I think at this point in where we are in this crisis, the mindset is around survival. And for me, survival means keeping in place what we have for our students. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. I promise you I don't have that many slides, but I just want to really have these slides to kind of show you what we're thinking at this point in the process. So as you know, again, on March 9th, the school committee certified a budget of $38,961,160, which is a very sizable increase of a little bit more than 2.5 million over this current fiscal year package. That represented almost about a 7% increase, you know, which again was a very sizable increase. And again, without reliving all of the details of my budget presentation before, more and more onus is falling on our two local communities. And kind of looking at some places where we can find savings due to this closure, which in end analysis will end up being about a 3-month closure, and also cutting back on things. Right now, I think one of the next steps is for the school committee to consider a budget of $37,133,486, which would dramatically dial down the increase. The increase would be in total of about 1.97% over this current year, or in total, $718,727. But it's our projection with some assumptions that that could keep us at status quo with regard to level services. So as a result, keeping the programs and services in place for students that we have. So I've been asked about what are some of the potential savings that the district is experiencing due to the COVID-19 closure. Keep in mind, and I'm sure most of you are cognizant of this, like any other school district, upwards of about between 80 to 85% of our expenses are tied up in salary and benefits. So as a result, the overwhelming majority of our budget, because we have not laid off anybody, will be expended. However, there are some areas, and these are some things that were covered during last Monday night's school committee meeting with regard to potential areas. And you could see we basically froze all of our instructional supply lines after 3/13. Friday the 13th of March was our last day in school with kids. In all 4 of our buildings, we've set the heat to night and weekend mode. So obviously they're a little cooler. And then obviously as we're moving into the spring months, as you all know, we had a relatively mild, snow-free winter, and the 1.5 storms that we've had since March, we've had absolutely no removal, just let it melt. Obviously, there's a little bit of savings with regard to substitute teachers. We've had to cancel any type of weekend and nighttime events, so our custodial maintenance overtime, there's savings there. Some savings with regard to workman's comp and unemployment. It came out, we usually conservatively budget that. It's lower than budgeted. As you obviously know, there's no spring sports season at both Misco and Nipmuc. Therefore, there's savings in athletic transportation. There's some other miscellaneous accounts, some related to special education and so on, that have come out less than budgeted. And then really the biggest piece, and again, we cannot really at this juncture get into the specifics, but we're in the process of negotiating with our bus company, Telstone and Son, and it's the expectation that every school district that uses an outside contractor do that to negotiate what our payment is going to be for this fiscal year, but realize at a minimum, we're looking to lock in, freeze the rate for FY20 into FY21 and potentially FY22. So those are, probably honestly a very, very large chunk between regional and transportation savings. It could be upwards of $400,000 to $600,000 of savings in those lines. And again, I know some of you had the opportunity to go to the budget subcommittee meetings that we had throughout the school year. SPED transportation, that is transportation specifically for a lot of our out-of-district placements, has become very costly, upwards of, almost 80 to 90% of what we're paying for regular transportation. So we're anticipating to save some money there. So the mindset in reducing the FY21 budget due to the crisis is, again, anything that was new that was presented in the certified FY21 budget, specifically those 4 additional positions. And again, there's nothing that we put forward that isn't critically needed. 2 of them were, school psychologists, for example. And again, I worry very much about, the mental health crisis, and particularly after going through this. But again, I think the mindset is about survival and holding on to what we have. Also, the intent would be to, in going through the budget, taking every single supply line and completely level funding it. We usually have some expenses with regard to technology, and as I noted before, this was slated to be the last of a 4-year lease that we have on our desktops and our laptops throughout the district. We will not be refreshing them. We were looking to hold on now for 1 additional year with the equipment that we have. As I said, we have a high degree of confidence in our negotiations for our transportation contract, that for us, the absolute floor would be to level fund the FY20 rate. And keep in mind, the original agreement was for about a 7% increase from FY20 to FY21. We'd also be looking to, based upon some of the savings, increase our school choice appropriation that we receive for students that choice into our district. I think a big piece too is we're in a unique position with regard to our 5 associations that have collective bargaining agreements. My expectation would be in probably having a 1-year rollover instead of, obviously, it becomes very, very challenging of having, you know, a full negotiation session for a successor 3-year contract. But the expectation is that in that 1-year rollover, you know, we would be looking at something that clearly was reflective of the crisis and the times that we're in. And as I said before, looking to appropriate some of those savings from this current fiscal year to offset FY21. So again, and you know, in putting this together and going in crisis mode, I think the assumption would be the state funding, specifically Chapter 70 and regional transportation reimbursement, will be level to FY20. Now, you know, again, I've had the opportunity to sit in countless Zoom sessions in which there's been a discussion of right now the shortfall for the state budget is estimated anywhere between $3 to $5 billion based upon revenue receipts. In all likelihood, we're probably not going to have some initial state budget numbers until June, possibly the end of June. So this is a really, really challenging assumption. But as I've said in my budget presentations in the past, more and more of the onus of our operating budget is falling to our 2 local communities. And I obviously don't anticipate that that's going to change. So under a potentially recertified budget, the operational assessments for Mendon, exclusive of debt, would be $10,197,621, which would represent a decrease of $773,214 from what was certified back on March 9th. And for Upton, it would be $12,223,378, which would be a decrease of a little under $1 million, $969,436 from the certified amount. So again, this is something that is difficult to plan. There's still a lot of variables, but I think it's very, very important to start the conversation. I know as superintendent, it's very, very important to have these conversations and, you know, to put out there that we want to, again, continue the best possible education for our kids and to provide everything to kids that we're doing, but we're also very, very cognizant of this crisis, of the reality. And we want to start the conversation sooner rather than later. So that's what we've put together so far. You know, at our next regional school committee meeting, I think we're going to probably drill down a little bit more into some of the details and some of the modeling. But at this juncture, that's what we have. And I think the mindset, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, is just to kind of start the conversation to see where our towns are and where the planning process is.
Yep. So I think that the next thing that we wanted to accomplish in the meeting is understanding that that's where the school committee is going at this point. We wanted to find out more about how the municipal budgets are going and what the stresses are in the towns given the crisis, and any kind of reactions for what we're proposing. So so anybody from FinCom in either town, do you have anything you can share with us?
Well, Sean,
Hi, Paul.
so somebody's got to be first. So you know, we had we were all signed, sealed, and delivered, so to speak, back in February, and then we went through and made the modifications because of the override issue. As far as what we want to do and what our plans are, Derek and I have talked about some things off the record, but you know, if he doesn't mind, I'll defer to Derek right now.
Sure. So obviously this override for the town of Upton is much more palatable, $200,000 and $1.2 million. I think that it's, for looking at our budget, I think it's very challenging to make any assumptions for us. There are projections that our state aid will get cut anywhere from 5 to 14%. So that being said, we would anticipate potentially having to adjust the town side's budget at the November town meeting to meet the reduction in state aid. So at 14%, it's approximately $80,000 of a cut towards the town side budget. So, you know, that being said, you know, I think there was a question asked, like, you know, how are we doing? I think our town is standing firm, standing its ground. We have a strong stabilization account, as you all know. We've certified in the past 2 years in the fall with strong free cash reserves. So we feel confident that we can weather an upwards of 1 to 2 year downturn in the economy. I think that it's difficult at this point to make any real decisions without deferring to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee as to what approach we want to take to achieve this $200,000 override. That's further compounded with the fact that we, as part of our ballot question, we included an additional $58,000 assessment that BBT had rendered to the town. So those are some issues that we have to discuss. Those are some of the things that I'm thinking about at this point, but certainly have to defer to the board and Finance Committee as far as which strategy we're going to take to meet this assessment.
Sean?
Yep.
Yesterday, the Association of Town Finance Committee arm of the Mass Municipal Association had a webinar with, basically it was led by John Robertson, who some of you may or may not know was a former Mendon-Upton Regional School Committee member and a member of the Mendon Finance Committee. He grew up in Upton. He now lives in Milford. But in any event, they went through several aspects of what the towns could foresee going forward. And one of them was, you're probably not going to have a budget until November, by the time everything shakes out and everybody has meetings. That the Bureau of Accounts will go along. You have to give them an explanation, of course, but they will go along with a 1/12 budget or an estimated budget. They are sensitive to the fact that towns have big payments due the first of the year, i.e. July. Like you have Worcester County Retirement System due, you have an assessment from the regional school district that's due. But they are willing to, rather than a 1/12 budget, go add additional monies, or even go with a temporary budget to get you through X amount of times. Now, I understand because of the regional school district and all this, you can't come back. Once you get your money, you can't come back. And you're obviously not going to go into the budget that with a certain amount of personnel involved, and then come November or December say, oh, gee, we don't have the money and we're going to have to let you go. I understand there's several moving parts in this. But one of the other things that came out of this was that I'm getting feedback here. I don't know why.
It's Steve's phone.
Could have been. It's not there now. He's gone. All right.
Okay, good.
The Mass Taxpayers Foundation puts together these numbers that are used to the INGO of the House 1. And they did that in January. Well, last week they came out with a new one that, as Derek alluded to, the revenues could plunge 3.9 billion or 15% below what they had originally anticipated. Now, even in January, and there's several areas that are affected. And if you go to the Mass Taxpayers Foundation website, there's a 8-page presentation there that tells you basically the facts of life as far as municipal finance goes. I know I had shared this with Phil DeZetta earlier today, and it is enlightening as far as that goes. So I just wanted to show this in that there is a place that you can go to see what they're talking about, the receipts. Again, with respect to this budget formatting and what was discussed at this webinar that Mass Municipal put on yesterday, it will be available. It was recorded, as all these things are, and it will be available within a week or so if you go to the website for the Association of Town Finance Committees. So that's, at this point, I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration.
Thank you,
So,
Paul.
Okay, well, Sean, this is Mike Morale. The Mendon FinCom met last night, and then, today was able to review what Joe had provided. Obviously, the revised override is much more palatable. It's about a $120 impact for the average family. If it was to pass, I think it's probably got a good chance to pass. We just are leaving things unchanged in our budget right now, providing what we said we could provide before, and would recommend the override the way that it's been proposed in this revised budget. And then we'll readjust after we see how the townspeople react. That's the Reader's Digest condensed version of it.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you for being direct on that. So, I want to make sure I was hearing correctly from the Upton side. Is Upton saying that the revised budget from the school committee was acceptable? It's within the means so far, or are the town finance pressures not predicted yet, or what's the circumstance in the Upton side?
Well, I would say, go ahead, Steve.
Okay, Derek. I was going to start by saying I would echo what you said earlier, Derek, which is it's at this point too early to tell what type of an impact it will have on us at this point in time. However, myself, I'm kind of looking at that both Mendon and Upton delayed our fourth quarter property tax payments till June 1st, again with a waiver on late fees till June 30th. So I think that's kind of an economic reader or an economic indicator that I'm kind of looking at to see how much are people struggling right now in light of COVID-19. I believe Massachusetts reported 1,940 new cases today. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're on the not just yet anyways, we're not on the downward side of the curve, unfortunately. And then I guess the only other thing I would add is we do have a meeting scheduled for next week, so it'll give us some time to kind of digest this and take a better look and put our heads together and see what we think is the best course of action at this point in time. Thank you. Go ahead, Derek.
No, Steve, I was just going to reiterate what I said earlier, but I think you hit the nail on the head that it's too early to tell. If our town accountant's on as well, and he often reminds me that our fourth quarter revenues, we don't see our fourth quarter revenues until after July 1st. So, and that's the same thing that the state's trying to grapple with as well, that their fourth quarter revenues are a little unpredictable at this point because they're not seeing them just yet. So I would recommend to the board, to my board and finance committee that, we don't make any changes to our existing budget other than amend the ballot question downward to meet the new assessment. That would be my recommendation.
When does the timing of the town meetings and elections happen for Upton?
That remains to be seen. That is an agenda item for next Tuesday evening, where the board will take up both the election and town meeting. I would anticipate, based upon the plateauing of what we're seeing right now with COVID-19, and then coupling that with the White House recommendations and the gating requirements to move into phase 1 and phase 2, and then ultimately phase 3, that we're really not going to see any real reopening until at the earliest, sometime in June. Mass General, they have a model right now that is suggesting that Massachusetts does not open or loosen any of its restrictions until June 30th. They believe, if anything, prior to June 30th could have an upwards of an additional 40,000 deaths if they were to reopen prior to June 30th. So I think the next 3 weeks is going to be telling us to which direction the Commonwealth moves into.
And we're in the same boat with Mendon as well. Is that correct?
We have a town meeting scheduled for June 1st, and then I believe it's either 10 or 12 days later is the election. We've already June 9th.
June 9th is the election.
We've already through the town clerk's office made everybody aware online that everyone can vote by mail, as everybody can in the Commonwealth. We don't have a quorum requirement for the Mendon town meeting, so it's possible we could actually have some kind of a social distance limited town meeting with the FinCom, the Board of Selectmen, and other interested parties, if the legislature decides to let us do that. That's my understanding. It's kind of in flux. And what that would do is, obviously, we have a meeting scheduled. The FinCom has a meeting scheduled next Wednesday. Obviously, it's up to the Board of Selectmen. But if I'm right in what I'm thinking, we're going to recommend this modified budget, and then it'll be up to the townspeople to vote on it. So we'll know sometime mid-June. At the earliest, I guess, if they recommended it or not. And if they don't pass it, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board and see how things shake out. But, we're still hopeful. I did see today that, Congressman Richie Neal was talking about, local aid on the federal level. And I did talk to Jim McGovern's office, our congressman, who's pushing hard for it too. So, there's just a lot of different things that are in flux that that are going to come into play. But from the town meeting standpoint, that's the current thinking of our boards, that June 1st, and then 9 days later is the election. It'll be mostly by mail, if not all by mail.
I'd like to just jump in here for a minute just to add. The select board is actually going to meet tomorrow, and we've added this to the agenda under 48 hours to discuss. We haven't had a chance really to even consider what any additional amount would do to our budget, because as I know you're all tired of me here and say this season, but we really don't have anywhere to go for it in the budget yet. So I think we want to be able to give this serious consideration, and we want to be able to support the schools. And that really requires that we look at the numbers again right now very carefully to see if there is any room. But in all likelihood, I think we have to go for an override if this is the amount that you need in order to support the programming that you need for next year. And if that's the case, then we can go forward for June 9th, but we will need to have a number so we can start printing the ballots very soon. So hopefully within the next week or so, we can really settle on where we're going to end up.
What is the date that you need for the printing of the ballots?
I believe it's May 4th. I'd have to double check with the town clerk, but I believe it's May 4th. And I've also already asked council if we had to specify on the ballot the exact amount, and we do. So, you know, I'm trying to find a way to buy us as much time as possible since the circumstances are changing weekly, you know, just in case. I mean, I also still think there's a possibility, even as we sit here today, and I'm sure Jay thinks the same thing. I don't know how we're having these meetings on June 1st and an election on June 9th. And if there's any way that we can delay them so that we can really secure the safety of our residents, we're going to consider it and try to do it, because that's what's important here. And if we have to operate with some sort of 1/12 budget, we'll do that too. I'm trying to figure out the best way to accommodate, and we all are, how to do town meeting in this environment. And there is some legislation that is being passed right now. I mean, luckily we don't have a quorum on our side, so that's not as much of an issue. But I mean, really this is about getting this information to the residents so that they can vote informed on articles. And right now we don't have a mechanism to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Kim. That was pretty informative.
Sean, can I ask a couple questions?
Of course. Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
The first question relates to both towns and what you've told us you can provide without an override, which was $250,000 in Mendon and $300,000 in Upton. Are we safe in assuming that that's the bottom, that it's not going to be less than that? I have another question, but I'll ask them one at a time.
For Mendon, I would say I hope not, but you know, the plan right now is that's what it is, but you know, there's still a lot that's in flux.
Okay.
I mean, but based on everything being the same, that's the bottom.
Is the question, is it the bottom? Is that the lowest amount?
Yes.
Yes.
In other words, are we going to find out in 3 weeks that it's actually 120?
We talked a little bit about this at FinCom last night, and we really haven't talked about it much at the select board level, but we are not revising our budget for FY21, right?
Exactly.
Because revising it down really is reducing services. And so we need to be at a point where that's absolutely required, right? So the number that we've given you from the beginning is really the number that I feel like we can afford, without having to make some cuts somewhere. So I feel comfortable at that number, unless for some reason, I mean, even with our revenue projections, even fourth quarter, I mean, Mendon and Upton, I think, are in similar situations where most of our revenue is residential and most of that is being paid by banks and mortgages. So we're pretty financially secure this fiscal year, but the decisions that we make now and the additions that we make now for 21 are certainly going to be hitting us hard for 22. And so every little bit that we add is basically going to be, it has a multiplier on it, essentially. So we have to be really careful about even small additions in the budget right now.
Same for Upton, I think.
Sorry, Jake.
That's okay. I just want to get a number. Same for Upton, Derek or Paul. You're talking still 300,000.
Yeah. So again, we have no intentions, at least as of right now, to change our budget. We submitted a balanced budget back in February, and we believe that's what we can afford, which is why we had to move forward with the override. And I agree with Kim that, you know, there's every decision we make in May of 2020 is going to have some type of consequence in May of 21. And so we want to be very mindful of that as prior to making any cuts, knowing that there's a strong likelihood that there may be cuts that have to be made in November. And so if we start cutting away into our operating budget and prior to FY21 beginning, it's only going to compound that problem on the town side come this fall. And so that's our concern. So the $300,000 we plugged in there, I think that's a fair number as of this time, just because the additional $200,000 override will, at least if passed, will provide flexibility to our decision makers in the fall if we have to start cutting into the budget.
So second question then is, are either of the towns realizing any savings for the remainder of this year that may help you out next year, similar to what we're finding at the school side? I realize you don't have the contracted services type of things that we do, but I'm just curious, are you realizing any savings at all?
Not at this time. We haven't seen the savings. Although our buildings are shuttered, we still maintain same office hours as we always have. Although we do have remote participation, our fire and police continue to maintain a 24-hour operation. I think we'll see probably small savings in the library as far as energy costs. That's probably the only building that's been closed to the public and really to the staff. The town hall has been open, fire and police buildings have been open, and same holds true for DPW. So I would say if any savings are going to be very, very minor.
Okay.
Best.
Mendon's in a similar situation, Jay.
Okay. So I was going to say, in relation to the town meetings, I know that I don't think we legally can do this, but I would love to just run the town meeting just like we're having this tonight, because I think you could actually effectively do it. But I don't think the Attorney General or the Secretary of State's going to allow for it. But I'd love to be the guinea pig for somebody and say this is how it could work.
Yeah, I think your imagination's getting the best of you.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're stuck at home for a long time, Paul.
Can I just weigh there on one thing? We were talking earlier, Derek was referring to, keeping everything the same. One thing you have to consider, if you get yourself into a situation where you're going to have to lay off people here and lay off people there, you're only going to realize probably 2/3 of that savings, because your unemployment costs are gonna eat up the other third. So it's not an even trade by reducing staff, because you have the cost with respect to the unemployment. And the other thing is Kim mentioned and Derek mentioned earlier that this is going to have a trickle down effect to the following year. Well, I think probably you're going to find out that it's going to have an effect 2 years going forward. This isn't, I don't think it's going to, from the financial side of it, I think you're going to have this for a couple of years. You're going to be feeling the effect of this. So.
Well, that, quite honestly, Paul, that's my biggest concern with all of this is we may be able to, as Joe has said, be in survival mode for FY21. FY22 is going to be a whole nother challenge, and depending on how the economy rebounds from this, based on how bad I think it's going to get, it could trickle on for 2 or 3 years. But FY22 is going to be very difficult, even if we can survive FY21. But I think we feel like we have to at least do what we can to survive 21 first, because if you can't get through 21, we'll deal with 22 when we get there.
Well, that's where you hope maybe like Maroli alluded to earlier, maybe Washington can come through with some money to help out these states and municipalities too. Don't hold your breath, but it could happen,
So this is Heather Alcock from the Mendon Finance Committee. So I'm not advocating one way or another, but I am curious about the thought process in terms of the override. Certainly it's much more palatable because it's much smaller than it was earlier, but given the issues that we could likely anticipate into 2022 or beyond, I don't know if there's been any consideration about that. And I'm coming to you from lovely Grand Canyon. I figured out how to do a background.
Great.
I'll mute.
Good job, Heather. I can't figure that one out yet.
Well, sure. I can address that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, please do.
So obviously what we are presenting to you tonight in relation to FY21, a lot of things have to fall in place for that to work and for us to be able to maintain level services. It's not like this is just an automatic given. A lot of things have to be negotiated still in order to make this work. We think we can accomplish it all, but there's still a lot of work ahead to go. FY22 is a whole nother ball game that I think, can we not do anything for FY22? I think the answer to that is pretty clearly no. We wouldn't have put forward what we put forward for FY21 if we didn't need it. So we're basically trying to survive the next coming year and be sensitive to the fact that there could be a lot of people out of work. And, we're trying to deal with that. Does anybody know, if you heard in town hall, are there a lot of people out of work in Mendon and Upton? Because the figures are not out past the middle of March before this all started.
So that's a good question, Jay. Kenny Costa, who's on, he did check our March figures. I think we were on 3% back in March. So we are also monitoring the unemployment numbers as well, because as Kim pointed out, that we derive most of our revenue from residential taxpayers. One thing I can tell you is the town put together a program, Neighbor to Neighbor, and it was a program that was actually led by the Board of Selectmen, who appropriated about $10,000 of trust fund money to help those folks in need. And so if we were to use that as a measure of individuals that are in need in town, as it relates to, say, housing assistance, I would say it's probably less than half a dozen that have sought that type of need. And we've tried to spread that far and wide. Again, we sent that notice to both schools to send that to their families and have disseminated it, through town crier, so on and so forth. So the point is, I feel like we really have blanketed the community to try to cast that net to try to get a better sense of what is the true need that's out there. So it doesn't seem like there's a major need, but it's still difficult to tell.
I think just from personal experience, there's a lot of people who are underemployed, at least in Mendon, based on the COVID-19, losing hours, salaries cut, working half-time now. So I'll be interested to see the unemployment numbers when they come out.
Yeah, unfortunately, by town, they do list them on the Department of Labor's website by town, but you won't see those for probably another 3 or 3.5 weeks. They just came out this past week through March, I think 14th or 15th, like Derek referenced. And there was really no change from February to March, but March to April is a whole different story. And I think we're not going to see that for quite a while. What's the date in Upton that you need a number for your ballots? Do you know?
Our town clerk is on, but we talked about that today, the Board of Selectmen's meeting on May 5th. I think we'd like to have a true number by May 5th. So when the board has to, so just so we're clear, just so everybody's aware, the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee, they settled on the number this past March 24th in order to meet the 35-day window to approve the ballot and those questions that go on the ballot. And so we did just that. And now we're going to have to make that change. And to be honest with you, we've already printed the ballot. So given this change, which again is a positive change, we're going to have to go ahead and reprint those ballots. So we don't want to do it a third time. So the hope is that you can give us a true number by May 5th so that we can go ahead and again print those ballots. But I would expect that we may have the election in mid-June. So that would really be the kind of the drop dead date, unless Kelly thinks that we can wait a little bit longer.
Hey, this is Nick Ciantra from Mendon FinCom. I just want to follow up on Jay and Heather's comments around the next year's budget. And Jay kind of alluded to the fact that we would need, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding it right, that another override would be needed next year as well. Is that accurate?
If you're asking me, based on what we're trying to do to get through FY21, I would say yes.
Okay.
And Heather, did you have any response to that as well, or you're in agreement? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
So that was really, I guess, where I was going with that question. And again, I'm not necessarily, I'm not stating a position, but I think that's something to consider. I appreciate the amount of work that, Jay and Dr. Maruschek have done to really look at the budget and look at some of the cost saving that they can do this year. I think, and I've said this before, an override, while more palatable, is going to be a challenge, especially in these, in this current situation, and, exponentially so if there's an override 2 years in a row.
Brett, I saw you on mute. Did you have a question?
It's along the same lines as the points being made here. I don't know, Joe or Jay, if there's a strategic thought process in putting off this year's override so that, from a political perspective, it's easier to get support for an override once than twice in a row. Obviously, everything you've done this year to, try to accommodate the environment we're in is yeoman's work, right? Going from 2.5 to 1.2, you're clearly stretching it thin. You're making that money go as far as you can. Everybody recognizes that. And frankly, I'd hate to end up seeing the schools get shorted because we don't take the right strategy. So my intent would be to try to figure out what the best strategy is to give the schools as much as support as we can over the next 2 years. And if the best strategy is to do a very small override this year and then reassess next year, and obviously if we need to do a smaller, larger override next year, then that's what we have to decide at that point. Or do we say, you know what, and maybe this is a question for the individual towns, like for Upton, do we, pay the difference between the 300 that we've budgeted and what you're asking for this year from, for example, stabilization, so that an override next year becomes more palatable. Again, I'm not necessarily advocating one way or the other, just trying to be thoughtful and strategic around what the options are in terms of the voters, the participation, the process of an override, the optics of doing an override, just that language and people fearing we're doing it 2 years in a row. So just wondering about your consideration of those concepts.
And I think, Brett, those are great questions. And I think our mindset at this point in time is thinking about, FY21 and getting through it so that we're not going to have a situation. I mean, a situation where we're laying off staff and as a result, class sizes are increasing, or we're going to have to make cuts to certain programs. So we put forward something that we feel is going to achieve that. But to underscore what Jay just said a few minutes ago, we're not out of the woods. We've got some work to do. We've got some negotiations to do on a lot of different fronts. But I think it's about making a decision that's reasonable for our communities and reasonable for our kids, which clearly are one and the same. I'm not necessarily as quick as Jay to say, hey, are you going to come back asking for an override next year? I think it's a high probability, but then again, we don't know where we're going to be again. And again, I think we've got to work, again, I think about all of our associations, all of our employees, and I think you have to take a look and say, what is reasonable given the circumstances, and what is reasonable given the state of the economy? And I'm very fearful, but I don't think it's a stretch to say this is worse than 08, 09, and 10. And conceivably we've got worse consequences during those years. I don't know at this point, but you know, at this point, I'm just trying to keep things at a minimum at status quo for our kids.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, just like I think I heard Kim and Mike reference, and I think I heard Paul and Derek say the same thing, we're trying not to have to make cuts if we don't have to next year. And that's the reason for a small override that just keeps us so that we can at least stay at where we're at level service, assuming everything falls in place.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think that's a great strategy, and I think everybody here appreciates that you've gone through that exercise. So at least for me personally, thank you for doing that.
Thanks.
All right, so I think we've got more information that's very thank you for all of your participation in this. Why don't we talk just a little bit about next steps? Joe, I'm just brainstorming here, but we probably should come back with some time frame under which we can return with a new proposed certified budget and whatever we need to do to support the town elections and the town meetings if they have them and whatever the circumstances are there.
Yeah, I think the smart play is sooner rather than later to post for another regional school committee meeting. And if I heard the two towns correctly, they need to have something in the ballpark of May 4, May 5 as far as a number. So I think the next steps for the school committee is you'd have to recertify a budget, and we could call a meeting, and in which the school committee could execute action to recertify at a different amount.
Yep. As far as I can tell, I think that's the next step for us. Is there any comment about that? Is everybody in agreement?
Sean?
Yep. Go ahead, Paul.
The biggest driver of this is you have to do you get your 35-day issue from the time of the election. So the first thing you got to do is you got to lock in a day when you're 99% sure you're going to have the election. All right. And if you can establish that day, then you go back and you count back your 36 or 37 days or whatever it is, however long it's going to take to start the wheels in motion.
Yeah, so if we do it as soon as possible, then you guys have some flexibility in when you can set your election date.
Well, Upton still hasn't established a date.
Yep, understood.
Don, I think honestly, having the election is probably not anywhere near as difficult as having the town meetings. The elections, you could use a school there's nobody in the school, set up voting booths in multiple classrooms. Basically, everybody could keep their distance. I think there's a way to pull off the elections on, like, Mendon's got it set for June 9th. I don't see why they can't have that election. Maybe you have to have the town meeting after that if you can't have it on the 1st. But I think the elections are easily accomplished. It's the town meeting that's the difficult part. Like I said, if they won't let us do it like this, if you have to physically be there, Ellen and I talked about this, how could we have a town meeting? Well, we could go in the gym and set the seats all 6 feet apart and pretend that everything's fine, but I think you'd get a pretty low turnout all the way around. Not that we get a lot of people anyway, so it's not like we, are going to be turning away hundreds of people.
Well, in any case, I think we've got the next steps understood for where we've got to go.
But don't forget, May 5th is next Tuesday. I'm not even sure that we have enough time to call a meeting, say, for next Monday night. I think it's too late because it's already Thursday night. So I think we're probably looking at the earliest Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, right? Maybe Kelly could answer that since she's a clerk.
Yeah, I think agenda has to be submitted on Thursday. I think that's right. But let's see
Yeah,
what we can do.
Hi, it's Kelly. Yeah, it is too late to submit for an agenda item for Monday night.
We could start the meeting late.
Unless you do, unless Joe wants to post something on the update on the school website, and you make it for 8:30 tonight. So if you post something by 8:30 tonight, for example, you could do it Monday night at 8:30.
Well, that gives me 25 minutes from today, from right now.
But it's more time than usual, isn't it?
We've got some next steps planned, and we've got a timer ticking for us. So, so why don't I move on to community comments? Yeah, go ahead,
Sean, if I may, just a minute.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. I was going to say we're scheduled for next Tuesday again, as we've mentioned earlier. We have some other budget or some other agenda items we have to attend to. But I could always put it out to my fellow board members if need be. We could meet the following Tuesday we'll hold, again, we could just keep our Board of Selectmen meeting for the 5th, and we could meet again on the 12th to address this particular topic, because I don't think we have it listed as an agenda item. Or Derek, correct me if we do. I'm not sure if we could address this particularly at that meeting unless we amend our agenda as it is currently written.
I appreciate it,
Yes.
Steve, but right now we have to make a deadline for Mendon. So why don't we try to get through the community comments now, and then we can hopefully get a meeting scheduled for Monday or Tuesday next week in the school committee. So let me move on to community comments. Are there any community comments? Raise your hand or unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. I don't see any community comments right now. Okay,
There's
seeing
a
no
question-
community
there's
comments.
a question in the chat, Sean.
Oh, okay, very good. Will a new budget, the question is from Shelley Cook, will there be a new budget posted to the website? And I believe that's standard procedure once we have the budget number certified. Is that correct, Jay?
Yeah, usually we post everything once it's been certified and stuff. I mean, if you're asking if there's going to be a new budget and what we're talking about posted tonight, I'd say the answer is probably a big no on that.
Right. I hope that's sufficient answer, Shelley. If not, please correspond with us later. Otherwise, I think we can take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Everybody's got to do their own, right?
I think so, yes.
All right.
All right, Upton Board of Selectmen members, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn. Brett Simus.
Aye, Maureen Dwinell.
Upton Finance
Stephen
Committee.
McCullion, aye.
All right, I'm sorry. Upton Finance Committee, motion to adjourn. Nick?
Motion to adjourn.
Name and yes.
Nick Ensko, aye.
Rick McGuire? Rick McGuire?
Bueller?
He
Bueller?
couldn't
you're
mute himself, so he
muted,
might not know how to unmute himself.
Just couldn't wait to leave the meeting, I guess.
He's still there. All right, Paul Flaherty, aye.
Jonathan Calianos, aye.
Oh, I didn't even know you were there.
Oh, I'm here. I'm a stealth like Paul.
Okay.
You got a majority, Paul.
Yeah, it works.
Mendon
Okay.
Board of Selectmen, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Tenio, aye.
Real eye.
Mendon FinCom, I need a motion.
I'd like to make the motion.
Do I have a second? Nick?
Seconded.
All right, Mendon FinCom's adjourned.
Okay, very good. Motion from the school committee.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Roll call vote. Sean Nicholson, aye.
Phil Dezetter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye.
Very good. I think we've got a majority, so we're adjourned as well. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, nice to see everybody.